il programma, così posso annunciare lo sviluppo del programma.
Buongiorno a tutti, diamo qualche minuto per entrare ai partecipanti e poi iniziamo. Potete in ogni caso mandare le vostre domande durante la presentazione e poi le faremo nel tempo del Q&A. Un attimo.
Buongiorno a tutti, è un piacere oggi continuare questa nostra serie di seminari sulle problematiche relative al mercato del vino negli Stati Uniti. Voglio ricordare che qualche giorno fa abbiamo introdotto il progetto wine.com, cioè la prima esperienza di collaborazione tra il sistema di promozione italiano e quindi dell'ICE con la collaborazione di wine.com, il più importante player nel settore della distribuzione online digitale del vino sul mercato statunitense. Oggi la nostra attenzione è focalizzata sul tema del mercato dei vini rosé, dei rosati, che negli ultimi anni hanno costituito, se vogliamo, assieme a qualche altro, il vero fenomeno di espansione di un prodotto all'interno del comparto del vino dentro il mercato statunitense. Abbiamo assistito a quella che era una crescita impetuosa sia dei consumi della produzione locale che di quella arrivata dal nostro principale concorrente, e cioè dalla Francia. E quindi era normale e naturale che già a partire da quest'anno, osservando quello che era stato l'andamento del vino rosé sul mercato americano, avevamo deciso di andare ad investigare in maniera più dettagliata per acquisire informazioni e trasformare poi eventualmente queste informazioni in una strategia di penetrazione dentro il mercato. Avevamo pensato di andare a realizzare, come dicevo, un'investigazione mirata e per questo ci siamo avvalsi di specialisti. Nello specifico, appunto, oggi verrà presentata l'indagine di mercato condotta da Katie Hughes e ci sarà anche la presenza di Rodolfo Neirotti, che andranno a darci un quadro delle rilevazioni, fornendo anche dei dati statistici di quello che è l'andamento del mercato dei vini Rosé sul mercato statunitense. Voglio prendere però qualche minuto di questa presentazione per evidenziare come il vino già oggi sia da considerarsi come il prodotto più importato nell'agroalimentare italiano. Il vino costituisce già il 35% di tutta la nostra produzione che raggiunge il mercato americano. Per darvi un'idea, valori vicini al vino sono costituiti da altri settori, altri prodotti agroalimentari assieme ad altro tipo di bevande, ma diciamo la voce è una voce importante. Per darvi un'idea, la pasta costituisce il 9%, come vedete da questa tavola che stiamo presentando. Quindi un'importanza vitale, per darvi un'idea, sui 5 miliardi e 200 milioni di esportazione come dato medio tra il 2019 e il 2020, possiamo considerare il vino attorno ai 2 miliardi. Quello che è un dato anche che appare molto evidente dalla tabella che sottopongo alla vostra attenzione è che c'è praticamente un gioco alla pari tra i bianchi e i rossi. Un dato interessante è la crescita dei vini frizzanti e spumanti su questo mercato. Quindi nell'ordine abbiamo una presenza, diciamo, di vini bianchi attorno al 32%, di vini rossi attorno al 30%, spumanti e frizzanti attorno al 23%, e poi ci sono anche degli spazi per i vermouth e altri vini aromatizzanti che sono in crescita attorno al 7%, con altre tipologie che sono, diciamo, più o meno ferme, ma che costituiscono comunque una interessante espressione in alcuni casi della tradizione, diciamo, vinicola del nostro paese. Quando ho iniziato questo mio discorso evidenziavo come c'erano tante ragioni alla base di una ricerca da farsi sul rosato, ma le principali ragioni stavano appunto nei dati statistici che evidenziavano come un quantitativo rilevante di prodotto rosé proveniente soprattutto dalla Francia raggiungeva il mercato americano. E quindi era l'indagine destinata anche a capire quali sono le ragioni che hanno portato all'affermazione di questo prodotto proveniente dalla Francia e anche a delineare delle formule per poter far sì che anche la nostra quota di mercato potesse negli anni e con delle strategie idonee, strategie appropriate crescere. Quindi cosa abbiamo analizzato sostanzialmente in questa ricerca? Abbiamo cercato di avere un quadro chiaro dalla ricerca, l'analisi della nascita e del percorso che ha determinato questa tendenza. Poi abbiamo raccolto possibili indicazioni sul futuro per prevedere l'andamento, cioè l'idea era di capire se si trattava di una fiammata, diciamo, temporanea che poteva riguardare il mercato o era invece un sistema moda, tendenza che però si sarebbe andata a consolidare nel tempo, lasciando anche quando si dovesse verificare, diciamo, una caduta di attenzione o una caduta, diciamo, della moda che fa tendenza, capire quali potevano essere i valori che, su cui, diciamo, l'Italia può contare per posizionarsi al meglio. Poi inoltre, ed era importante, identificare il profilo del consumatore di vino rosato perché molto spesso la delineazione di un profilo del consumatore ideale di vino rosato è legato a tutta una serie di pregiudizi, a tutta una serie, diciamo, di stereotipi che si sono stratificati nel tempo e che invece oggi hanno bisogno di essere rivisti alla luce di questo interessante fenomeno che c'è sul mercato americano e non solo. Quindi noi pensiamo che attraverso lo studio che verrà presentato oggi ci siano elementi sufficienti per il sistema di promozione pubblico e di collaborazione con le associazioni di settore competenti per definire un percorso promozionale, ma anche ci siano dentro questa presentazione gli elementi affinché individualmente le imprese, i consorzi possano identificare quali possono essere le azioni da svolgere nel prossimo futuro per poter penetrare ancora di più dentro questo mercato. Voglio evidenziare come il settore del vino sia uno dei settori che è fortemente sostenuto dall'attività promozionale su questo mercato. Ho citato già il progetto annuale con wine.com. Attività di supporto importanti vengono realizzate per le formule di education che si fanno sul territorio e che vengono fatti con la collaborazione e supportando Slow Wine, Gambero Rosso e IM. E poi aspetto importante, soprattutto negli ultimi anni, della strategia di promozione è il numero rilevante di buyers che vengono invitati in Italia in occasione delle manifestazioni di settore. Naturalmente è importante anche l'attività di comunicazione che passa attraverso il sito internet, ma soprattutto con i social media, cioè con i nuovi tools della comunicazione che sono dedicati alle problematiche appunto del vino. Naturalmente sono in via di definizione anche altri eventi di promozione del vino dove uno degli aspetti importanti sarà quello di lavorare molto sulla informazione al trade e l'education al consumatore, avvicinandolo sempre di più con dei pairing, degli abbinamenti tra vino e cibo che costituiscono uno degli elementi, diciamo, di maggior successo in termini promozionali. E appunto a questo scopo si sta mettendo in atto e si continua con il processo di education del trade americano con degli eventi mirati nelle città, con una nuova strategia che tende a inglobare, se non addirittura a privilegiare, le città, chiamiamole diciamo dell'interno o di quegli stati o quelle metropoli che sino ad ora non sono stati, diciamo, fortemente coinvolti nelle nostre strategie, e intendo riferirmi alle città del Midwest piuttosto che le grandi metropoli texane o anche di altri stati. Quindi l'idea di costituire sempre più un network di buyers, di giornalisti, di opinionisti, di influencer che si possa configurare come un network nationwide, uscendo dalle tradizionali aree, diciamo, della costa del Pacifico e della costa dell'Atlantico, per supportare in futuro con questo tipo di attività nuovi interessi verso la produzione italiana che, come avete visto, tocca diverse componenti del mercato e della produzione del vino e ci sta a cuore il fatto che anche nello specifico settore del rosato l'Italia possa raggiungere dei livelli soddisfacenti e avvicinarsi a quello che è, diciamo, il leader di mercato. Io con questo avrei finito, vi ringrazio della vostra attenzione e passerei appunto la parola a chi ha realizzato lo studio e ci farà la sua presentazione. The floor is for you, Kathy Hughes, please.
Thank you very much. I am so pleased to be here and to be presenting our findings from this research project that we undertook with the Italian Trade Association. And I would like to also welcome my friend and colleague, Rodolfo Neroti, who will be joining me midway through the presentation to provide his perspective from the retailer's point of view, specifically about rosé wine and consumer interest in it from the floor, so to speak. So let me try to share my screen and hopefully you will be able to see the entire screen. Please let me know if you can or cannot from here. Please just give me a little bit of a thumbs up or thumbs down if you can see the whole screen. Great, thank you. Okay, so the project that Enolytics was enlisted to do certainly was around a market analysis of rosé wine in the United States. There were four main areas for this, and I'll move through them pretty quickly. One is, the first objective is to investigate the rosé trend from the beginning. I'll focus on the most recent history of rosé wine in the United States. Secondly, we'll investigate the future of this trend. And then we'll pause and turn the camera over to Rodolfo for his perspective from the retailer's point of view. Then we'll move on to the third objective, which is to investigate the position of Italy and its competitors. And finally, investigate the rosé consumer demographics and trends. And that's specific to the data that Enolytics has, particularly from an e-commerce point of view. So a little bit just to note, and some caveats really to point out, is that the data about rosé wine, as this audience certainly knows, is fragmented. It's not of a piece, it's not woven together in any comprehensive way from both the production and the sales side of things. So that makes things a little bit difficult, but we certainly did the best that we could. The methodology that we would have taken for white wine and rosé and red wine is different than what we had to adopt for rosé wine. So as a result, the analysis that I'll be talking about today is partial, but it also represents as much and as accurately as we currently can. So let me begin with the first objective, which is to investigate the rosé trend from the beginning. And I'll focus very briefly on the modern history of rosé in the United States. You may be familiar with the very, very popular trend of blush wines in the United States that referred mostly to white Zinfandel, which is, and notice the color, and it was particularly predominant since the 1970s. The domestic production of blush wines in that time period, in order to establish rosé wine in the US, cannot be underestimated. Sutter Home, Woodbridge White Zinfandel were two of just the giants of this category very early on. At the same time, however, cult importers such as Kermit Lynch and others began introducing non-US wines of the rosé style into the US market. So both of those things were happening at the same time. The current trend, which you will be very well aware of, can be traced predominantly to about 10 years ago, driven largely by French wines and mostly by Provence. Whispering Angel, of course, and the Palm, and we'll talk about those a little bit further. The things to notice in particular is, of course, that they're French, they're from the Provence region, and also notice the color. That becomes something that is a consistent theme throughout all of the presentation. So in 2007, we went from blush wines, white Zinfandel in the 1970s, to starting to see some European rosé production brought in from cult importers. And now 2007 was really a turning point on the global stage, the global market for rosé wine. It marked an increase, a boost, an intense concentration in marketing to focus on the pale pink Provence style rosé, and also sort of the accompanying lifestyle imagery, the lifestyle imagery around rosé being associated with beaches and pools and glamour and sort of girlish, very feminine imagery being associated with pink or rosé wine. So here's the impact that had on the market. According to IWSR and BW166, US rosé sales volume increased by more than 1,400% between 2010 and 2020. The leading drivers of that were France and California, really the lion's share of the market, France and California, followed by Italy, and then Washington, and then Oregon. So in addition, if we narrow the focus to 2015 to 2020, the volume of still rosé wines in the US increased by 118%, only within that, that specific window of time. Okay, so that's a little bit of a brief overview of the history to where we are today. The second objective of this project was to investigate the future of this trend, looking at opportunities and obstacles in particular. The opportunity is massive. The rosé category is forecasted to grow by almost 70%. In addition to all the growth that we have seen up until this point, it's expected to grow even more between 2020 and 2024. So the researchers are saying that the market for rosé wine in the US has not even reached its maturity. So there's still definitely potential for growth. If we want to focus on different commentary from journalists and influencers within the research community, rosé's expansion is expected to continue according to 750's data, and it appears to be strongest among premium brands. So when we're talking about premium, we're talking about typically $15 and above. And also, this is the first time in this presentation, and we'll see it again, that alternative formats, alternative packaging, namely cans, will continue to see expanded growth. Rob McMillan from Silicon Valley Bank is on the record of saying that there's every reason to believe that we'll see continued growth in this category of rosé wine as the younger consumers who were introduced in a lot of ways to wine through the rosé lens, especially over social media, they continue to age, but rosé has been a gateway for them in a lot of ways to the enjoyment and the appreciation of wine. And as a matter of fact, Rob McMillan says that the category even seems to be broadening its season. There's a little bit of an assumption that rosé is a summertime wine, a warm weather wine, a warm season wine. But I think Rodolfo will also speak to this about how that continues to expand. And there's several reasons for that, not least of which is COVID and the impact that consumption patterns during COVID has that we're seeing in the data. Okay, so here's a couple of points around the opportunities for rosé wine in the US market. Much like Prosecco, and the linkage of Prosecco and rosé is very important to this presentation and to the future of this opportunity. Much like Prosecco, rosé has established itself as a year-round category. Prosecco is no longer a holiday wine, it's no longer only a celebratory wine, it's a year-round consumption. Rosé has also gained shelf positions both at the retail, in the retail environment, as well as wine list placements in restaurants. And that retail environment, of course, includes e-commerce opportunities as well as brick and mortar opportunities, to the point earlier around the affiliation with wine.com and the initiative with wine.com. So as consumers age, taste profiles change. So the boomers, the ones who have the most money to spend, the most disposable income to spend on wine, they're aging and they're getting older and their taste profiles are changing. Rather than reaching for a big, huge, fruit-forward 15% alcohol wine, they may be looking for something lighter, a different alternative. And as I had said, COVID has facilitated the transition of rosé into not only an outdoor occasion wine. It's not only what you take to the beach. It's not only what you take to the mountains. It's not only what you drink on your deck or next to the pool. It's come inside, so to speak, largely thanks to changing patterns of consumption during COVID. As I mentioned, COVID has shifted consumption patterns of wine in general, and rosé wine specifically. So even though there is still this association of rosé wine being primarily for women or for young millennial women, there's, I think, less of a stigma around that, around the associations of consuming rosé, specific to age and gender. It's just COVID has, because wine consumption has happened so much indoors and kind of behind doors, it's sort of opened up a lot of opportunities, I think. So the retail will become even more critical, especially as in-person shopping is becoming more and more able to be done now. Retail will become even more critical to keep the rosé category stable for imported wines, especially from lesser known regions. And for better or for worse, at this moment, we need to identify Italy as one of the lesser known regions of producers for rosé wine. Okay, so opportunities, looking at opportunities in the future. There's 4 different ways that I think that we can orient this. One is around shifts in origin, the origin of the wine, the sparkling category, the packaging opportunity, and also year-round consumption. So let's talk about the origin. The country of origin is becoming less important for leading brands of rosé production. Why is that? Primarily because climate change is impacting lower yields. Climate change is impacting lower yields. That means less production from the traditional, like, major areas of production of rosé, and which means there's less juice, there's less wine available to meet the demand. So the origin of the wine is in flux, frankly. And so I think that that's going to be reflected in the demand and in the consumer understanding of where the rosé is coming from. More important than origin is the color and the cachet, not least of which the celebrity association of rosé wine that we'll talk about in just a moment. Another opportunity is around sparkling rosé. And this is something that I think Rodolfo will address in just a moment. But there is an opportunity that we see for Italy to capitalize on the continued growth of sparkling rosé as well as Prosecco. Those 2 major market trends, rosé and Prosecco, join together, and there are requests for it. There's a demand pull for exactly this opportunity. Packaging meaning something other than 750 milliliter bottles. So alternative formats in terms of cans, in terms of bottles, or sorry, in terms of boxes, you can see the numbers on the increase, especially on a platform like Drizzly, which reflects brick and mortar retailers more even than wine.com, for example, which is entirely a digital platform. So super premium canned rosé from southern France, and also new entrants into the market from Chile and Greece and Germany and Argentina, they contributed to a 62% growth of canned rosé from outside Provence. 62% growth in Winebow, which is a major importer and distributor in the US, their rosé category between 2014 and 2019. Canned rosé from unusual origins. Year-round consumption. And I like to refer to Wolfer Estate on Long Island. Maybe it's familiar to you. Their production, when this winemaker, Roman Roth, took the helm at Wolfer Estate in 1992, went from producing, I think, maybe 200 cases in 1992 of rosé wine, and the production is now over 137,000 cases from Long Island only of rosé wine. It's extraordinary. So Roman Roth, he sees that southern states, including Florida and Georgia, the summer lifestyle happens year round. And so there's an opportunity for that. Rodolfo happens to live in a northern state in a cold region. I live in the South. And it's true that we are seeing rosé wine as an opportunity in December, just as much as we see it in June. Okay, let me talk first very quickly about a couple obstacles for the future of rosé. The rosé market has become very crowded. Consumers have a lot of options, really a lot of options, and the consolidation of the brands can be anticipated, especially at the lower end of the pricing scale. Below $10, below even $8. there's an abundance of options for consumers and not a lot of differentiation to that. The growth that we see in the opportunity will be at the higher end, especially at the $20 price point and above, and even at the $15 price point and above. Obstacles, another obstacle for the future is around COVID and on-premise shutdowns. What that has done, and you will be familiar with this, is cause a backlog of wine. The vintages from 2018 and 2019 are still what's on the shelf. They're still what's selling. And the 2020 vintage, because of supply chain issues, is being held up in shipping and on containers. So prices have dropped as a result. So that means that brands who are new to the category, who have jumped in, especially at the lower end of the scale, they're unlikely to really make a push or even maybe to survive. And of course, that unfavorable exchange rate currently between the US and Europe, and tariffs on imports. You can see a few of the examples specifically. In 2019, 936,000 cases of rosé wines, in 2010, were imported to the US. By 2019, that number had increased to 6.5 million, up from 936,000 9 years earlier. But in 2020, it's a significant drop, way down to 4.5 million cases of rosé wine that was imported to the United States. Okay, so let me turn the camera over to my colleague and friend, Rodolfo Nerati. Rodolfo, can you please take a moment to introduce yourself and your perspective and where you're coming from before we shift into your insights?
Sure, thank you, Kathy. And thank you to the ITA and to Commissioner Laspina. I hope everybody can hear me. If there's any issue, please let me know. My background is as head of a chain of boutique retailers here in metropolitan Boston, in affluent neighborhoods of metropolitan Boston, which is, I would say, a desirable target market to any importer and any Italian winery. So I have that perspective for over 15 years, as well as experience in importing. So I hope I can give you a little bit of context from the front lines, as we might say. And Kathy referenced regional differences. So as a disclaimer, I would say I'm giving you a point of view that is somewhat influenced from being in New England, where rosé does remain seasonal. But interestingly, the interest in rosé has started earlier and earlier, nearly every year, to the point where now demand for it starts in March and ends in late August. So you can see this is not entirely tied to weather. And I think that also presents a challenge to wines that arrive late, which in the current context of the global shipping crisis is particularly concerning, and hopefully will be resolved, I'm not sure, in time for the next season. So I'll touch on 4 areas fairly quickly, and hopefully that'll leave time for questions at whatever point those are introduced. So let me touch on consumer curiosity. There has been a remarkable growth over the past 10 plus years with significant interest in Southern France. That's no surprise, but there is a notable curiosity, an openness to other origins, less so other styles. So just so we're clear here, origin seems not to be as much of a hindrance as a stylistic shift that's too far afield. And we must acknowledge that at least here we have seen somewhat of a slowdown of this category, notably as of this year. The light pink color is still strongly flavored over the ruby colored rosé, which is not uncommon in Southern Europe. For Italy, this favors lighter varietals. Think a bit about the success of rosé made of or from Pinot Noir, and then the potential laterals for Italian varieties. And I can speak more on that if need be. Rosé appeals with consumers' perceptions of lighter wines in every sense. Kathy touched on this a bit, but presently it really aligns with the current interest in wines that are somehow perceived as lighter, maybe more forgiving in a sense due to lower alcohol, less manipulated in some sense. It is worth pointing out that the consumer seems overwhelmed by too many options that appear the same. So that presents a challenge from the point of view of more competition and likely increased consolidation, but also an opportunity for the winner, as is always the case. The producer, the region, who ultimately does get that shelf spot. And even if there is curiosity, it is worth noting that rosé that is somehow different in nearly any way, it requires considerable hand selling. So now let me touch a bit about the sparkling opportunity. Sparkling is a big part of the growth that Kathy spoke of. Literally, the consumer seeks out what they in general refer to as sparkling rosé. Obviously, no connection there to a rosé sparkling wine, other than that's the way they think about it. And another growth driver, as was mentioned, is the convenience-driven canned rosé. And that can be as much as $8 for 375 milliliters. So when you convert and say that's a $16 bottle, these aren't economy wines in any way. Sparkling wine is also less seasonal than rosé, so that again gives the opportunity of catering to a larger part of the year. But this is not the case for cans. In our experience, these are extremely seasonal, particularly if they were to contain rosé or sparkling wine. I think largely due to the fact that they're conveniently consumed outside. Prosecco rosé, I think, will make sparkling rosé even more of a category where ultimately the DOC will be less and less important. And I think this is an opportunity for Italy to introduce more sparkling rosé according to the style, again, rather than the origin. So it's opening a door, and I think it would be a mistake to not to recognize that, even if understandably not every producer can participate in the sparkling segment. So touching on pricing briefly, the consumer is looking for the consumer that's looking for rosé in the sub $12 price point is not discerning and already very well served. I believe Italy should target the $15+ audience, particularly 15 to 20, and even 20 to 25. So that almost points to the emergence of about 3 tiers in my mind. The first one being wines that are fruity, have a freshness, sometimes even a slight effervescence. The second tier, price-wise, wines that are drier and somewhat more serious. And lastly, at the higher price point, dry rosé that's high acid with mineral notes. And I would say, if tasted blind, almost like a white wine. It is worth pointing out that the sub $12 buyer will happily drink the previous year's vintage. So there is an avenue for the previous year's vintage rosé, but it is below a certain price point. Above that price point, people are aware. So strategy-wise, this should come as no surprise. Italy, I believe, needs a comprehensive country level and then regional level strategy with corresponding marketing expenditure. The individualistic approach on the whole is less likely to succeed, in my opinion. And here, key element is that Italy needs to be able to identify, reach, and convert the most important procurement decision makers and trendsetters. They will ultimately, to a large extent, decide the fate of Italian rosé as the powerful gatekeepers that they are. Thank you for your time and attention.
Rodolfo, thank you very much. And I really value your perspective from the retailer's floor, so to speak. And I think it's also worth noting, and maybe you can talk to this for just a moment, Rodolfo, about the difference in Italian, in the adoption or the appreciation for Italian wine in a brick and mortar environment, such as those that you're familiar with in Boston. Frankly, the East Coast is more oriented toward Old World or European wines than other parts of the United States. So can you speak a little bit to that difference between the e-commerce opportunity, the digital online opportunity, and that in the brick and mortar environment?
Yes, certainly what Kathy mentioned is entirely true. The East Coast is a fertile ground for Italian wine. It looks to Europe just as much, if not more, than it looks to the West Coast, because it is equidistant, and that's where the memories and the experiences, which ultimately I think many of us will acknowledge is what sells wine. That's where those come from. So many of these folks have traveled to the areas, and that I would say is a part of a comprehensive national strategy when it comes to marketing. On the e-commerce front, I don't know if Kathy, that's what you were referencing, or if.
No, please continue, Adolfo. I don't mean to say that brick and mortar should be prioritized or one or the other over e-commerce, only to note that there's a nuanced difference here in interaction geographically speaking.
Correct. Brick and mortar allows for a certain level of showroom experience, as I call it, which e-commerce cannot. It is more transactional. There are many ways in which many are attempting to supplement for that successfully and unsuccessfully. But surely, I think there has to be awareness that wine sold through the e-commerce channel, that will depend even more so on the success of an overarching marketing framework, because there is virtual tastings are now a fixture, I think, and not going anywhere. But when the consumer's online, moving quickly, and driven in part by convenience, I think there it is very important to minimize friction, and that's why I would encourage those thinking about the potential for Italian Rosé in the United States market not to reinvent the wheel. You can, it is at retail, through restaurants even more so, there's an opportunity for a more wines that somehow differentiate. At e-commerce, this is more challenging, and the growth of e-commerce and the staying power of e-commerce points to, I think, it being a risky proposition, particularly for medium to larger size wineries, to count on on-premise segment or brick and mortar being able to convert consumers to something entirely different on their own.
Yeah, I agree with Adolfo, and I think that what we're underscoring here is the need and the imperative, really, to have a dual-pronged approach. Yes, brick and mortar. Exactly. Yes, e-commerce. They're different animals. They're different animals, and there's different strategies and different approaches from both sort of an operational point of view as well as a marketing point of view to both of those things that are continue to be both very important. So yes, Rodolfo, thank you. I know that Paula is monitoring the chat box, and we'll circle back after we finish these last two sections if anyone has questions for you from the retailer's perspective specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to the last two objectives of the Rosé project that we explored. Objective 3 was to investigate the actual position of Italy and its competitors, particularly France, that we've been talking about, in the United States. Here's a look at the market share of sales by color, according to Nielsen, in 2020. So dominated by red, white, a little bit less so, and you can see that the 7.1% for Rosé. So although Rosé accounts for more than 9% of the market in terms of cases, it accounts for only 7% of the market in terms of revenue. meaning that rosé wine has this association with cheap wine. And so that is where, this is why we're saying that we think the opportunity for Italy is in the more premium categories to sort of boost that ratio. You can see a little bit of the numbers. Yeah, so rosé wines that are priced less than $10 are absolutely dominated by domestic producers. They own about 85% of the segment. To Rodolfo's point earlier, it's crowded. It's a crowded segment of the market. There's a lot of options. Consumers who are shopping at that tier are overserved or well-served, if not overserved. So, however, the further we move up the price strata, the less US dominance takes hold. You can see that only about 60% of rosé wines in the US are priced between $10 and $20 are domestically produced. The French, however, own about 30% of that segment, and Italy currently owns about 5%. $20 and above, this is where the French take over, really predominantly. They own about 87% of this segment. US producers own about 10, and Italy owns only about 20. Only about 2. So we really believe that the opportunity for Italian rosé is in the segment $20 above, even $15 and above, to Rodolfo's point. It's also the highest revenue opportunity and the highest margin opportunity. It's also where French producers are more vulnerable to infiltration by Italy and the US. Okay, let's hear just a visual about market share by segment and color. Red wine, of course, at the $20 and above, at the lowest bar here, is up around 70%. White wine is at 26%. And you can see sort of the blush, and this is a holdover from the 1970s, right? But this is where it's categorized in the data even today. The blush wine along the left-hand side of this chart is the biggest at the cheapest. And the further that we get down the price bar is where blush wines gets smaller. So it's sort of like if everyone is zigging, you zag. There's that zigzag. If everyone's over here, the opportunity is over there. Here are market leaders. The US owns about 65 to 75% by revenue, followed by France, followed by Italy. So these 3 countries control about 96% of the market for this category. Here's a look at the leading French rosé brands in the US. You can see it's primarily French dominated, no surprise there. You can also see how the numbers are adjusting between 2019 and 2020 to some of those market forces that we have been mentioning earlier. The growth of rosé wines outside of French rosé wines outside of Provence is notable, especially in terms of e-commerce. So we did a deep dive into 750's data, which indicates that other French regions outside of Provence are gaining traction in the US rosé market, which I think speaks to Rodolfo's point around opportunities that less at the DOC or the DOCG level and more at the sort of broader, more regional level. For French regions outside of Provence, looking more at the Rhone and the Loire, which were up significant numbers, 75% and 83% for the 5 years beginning in 2014. So it's not like it just happened yesterday. This momentum has been building. Okay. Recent category entrants that Italy needs to be aware of: Argentina, Australia, Chile, New Zealand, Spain, lots of Southern Hemisphere wines, but getting in, obviously seeing the opportunity around rosé wines and making their own entry into the market. Here's something worth noting. We looked at the 20 leading global rosé producers by revenue and cases. and only 3 of them make Italian rosé. Riboli, Prestige Beverage Group, Pompey International. None of those 3 are in the top 10. So there's definitely an opportunity to expand that presence, to expand that footprint, to expand that, that revenue opportunity for Italy. So here's a look at the bottle prices by producers for rosé wine. So you could see that the way that the dots clump on the left-hand side of the screen here, meaning that the lower price, right? So primarily certainly less than $20, almost all less than 15. However, if you look at sort of the $15 mark and look to the right, it's not only, you know, $16 relative to 15, there's some that are really sort of stretching. They're really kind of stretching the opportunity here further out to the right. Here's a couple of looks at case studies of examples and why they succeed. So certainly you'll be aware of Whispering Angel as an example of a French rosé success. Why does it work? Why is it so successful? Here's 2 primary reasons. Online sales boomed, thanks in large part to Drizzly. They also have created strategic partnerships with Drizzly competitors, including Reserve Bar, which actually just bought Minibar. Online sales, of course, were critical during COVID. So clearly, Whispering Angel and Provence as a whole, they understood how to best strategize and, operationally speaking, get their presence known and felt and recognized in the online digital environment. They did an excellent job of that. They put themselves in front of consumers who were shopping online, especially during COVID, when the online platforms replaced sommelier roles, and in a lot of cases, brick and mortar retail salespeople's roles, when restaurants were closed. So here is sort of the second version, or kind of the higher up the price tier version. I'm sorry, the lower version down the price tier from Whispering Angel is called the Palm. It's lower price, it's targeting even younger consumers. And the reason why this works is that they have created, I mean, even if you look at the difference in the packaging between Whispering Angel, much more austere, the Palm, much more fun and fruity and creative, and a younger demographic, also lower price point. Here, though, is a little bit of a visualization around how Provence Rosé has been premiumized. So you've got the Palm, which you just looked at $15. You've got the Whispering Angel at $22, but then it keeps going up. It keeps going. If you remember that bar chart, it keeps stretching to the right. So this is where things are opening up. Literally, a space is being created to that area to the right of the cluster and the overcrowded price sectors. So 15, 22, 35, 75, and 100. So this would be familiar to you as well as an Italian Rosa success story. Dolce and Gabbana, here's why that works. So obviously a celebrity collaboration, Dolce and Gabbana with Donna Fugata. It's an ambassador for the Made in Italy excellence. Made in Italy excellence. They also share the common ancestry and traditions of Sicily. It was offered in a limited edition label and gift box. The first vintage in 2019 sold out in less than 2 months. And it's comprised of indigenous grapes, which is interesting. And also not something that necessarily needs to be noted on the packaging. And you'll notice also the color, of course. But this is just one example of why it works. I'm not suggesting that everyone can or should do this, but it's pushing the envelope and it's creating more opportunities in that space. So this just underscores what I just said, the celebrity factor, the limited availability, it's exclusive, it's precious. It also piggybacks on a well-established importer, and distribution partners in the United States. Donna Fugata, well established, they're with Folio Fine Wine Partners, well established, and of course it creates a compelling narrative, particularly around the Made in Italy excellence, in this case specific to Sicily. So here were just a couple examples of the bestsellers last summer in the New York metro area. I had mentioned Wolfer Estate and the winemaker Roman Roth from Long Island. And then, so that's top of the market in terms of volume in the New York metro area, Mathiasen Rosé, and then another Rosé from the Pacific Northwest. So let's look at a little bit of the specifics of this and notice the price points. Yes, the Northwest Wine Company from Oregon, $15. That's just at the bottom of what Rodolfo and I are talking about. The Wolfer Estate and the Mathiasen, $22 and $25. The Mathiasen Rosé is coming from, it's not coming from Napa, it's coming from Yolo County. Yolo County. Who knows where Yolo County is? And also, maybe rosé wine from New York State and Long Island in particular isn't necessarily something that to look for, that most consumers know to look for, but yet it's one of the best sellers this past summer in the biggest wine market in the country. Okay, let's have a look at possible scenarios for future success. Certainly to leverage the market and the appetite and the thirst for Prosecco Rosé. Here's another opportunity that may at first sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I had mentioned earlier that the boomer demographic, the ones who have the most disposable income to spend on wine, they're getting older, their tastes are changing, and also women are becoming more of the gateway consumer within this demographic. So you could see an example here that I put, it's called Endless Crush by Kathleen Inman, produced in Sonoma County. It's a rosé of Pinot Noir, and it sells at $35 for a bottle of rosé, and you almost cannot get a hold of it. They sell almost exclusively through e-commerce and DTC. It definitely over-indexes on women of the older demographic who are buying this wine. So that's sort of an example, a case study worth, I think, for further consideration. On Drizzly, here are the best-selling rosé brands. So this is an online sales platform that is tied directly to the inventory of brick and mortar stores. So this probably doesn't come as any surprise to you, but you won't see Italy on this list yet. Okay. The unit price for rosé on Drizzly has grown 6% year over year, suggesting that consumers, they're reaching, even on e-commerce channels, they're reaching for the higher priced wines. Okay, and then the final objective that we'll look at today is to investigate the rosé consumer demographics and trends. So lessons from rosé's success, not only in Italy, but certainly from Provence and France and the US in general. Rosé's benefited from its position as a gender neutral beverage. We think of it as female, but actually it's there's also some really fun and influencer trends like rosé, meaning more male consumers are looking for it. Rosé also appeals to a lighter and more carefree drinking occasions, with packaging options like cans and smaller format bottles and also boxes to match. And it's influential in cross-category innovations such as Prosecco, such as sparkling rosé. Rosé is quote unquote easy. It's non-threatening. It's easy to say. Consumers feel like they don't have to know a lot in order to drink it. And there's no, when you say rosé wine, there's no evident link to a specific grape. I know very well how proud Italy is of its indigenous grapes and its indigenous cultivation, or its cultivation of indigenous varieties. But when we're talking about rosé, it doesn't have to be a specific grape. There's rosé of everything. Endless Crush I just mentioned, rosé of Pinot Noir. Wolfer Estate in Long Island is using Cabernet Franc in their rosé. Like it isn't tied specifically to a particular grape, which is an opportunity. In the consumer's eyes, we need to definitely think about social media in this case, because rosé is very picturesque. It photographs well, especially on social media. And of course, that has expanded into different hashtags, rosé all day, Hampton Water, the Wolfer Estate is a strong influencer on that front, and rosé all damn day. There's just a couple images of what will be familiar to you in terms of the demographics who are looking at this. When we look at the e-commerce data that is specific to Analytics's analysis, certainly we do see that it's female and millennials a little bit older than maybe you would have thought. It's 30 to 40 years old, not 25 to 30, and also very much middle class as opposed to highly affluent. So women are 13% more likely than average to purchase rosé wine online, as opposed to men who are 15% less likely than average to purchase rosé wine online, is what we have found. So that opens up, I think, an opportunity both for sales targeting women online and also sales targeting men more in the store or on restaurant wine lists. In terms of demographics, we can see here the likelihood to purchase rosé is higher the younger the consumer is, and as opposed to the silent generation, which are really quite the older ones, which are significantly under indexing. Okay, and then we can see here also the breakdown of the affluence, the area of affluence, and the economic location of the consumers who buy rosé online. Okay, that's what I have to say for as a summary of the 4 objectives from this rosé study that we have done. I see that we still have some time, and Paolo, maybe you can chime in and let us know if there are any questions specifically for Rodolfo or myself. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen now, but can go back and open it up again.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you very much, Rodolfo, for these presentations. Penso che le presentazioni dei nostri 2 relatori abbiano dato un quadro abbastanza dettagliato di quello che è stata, cioè, la nascita e l'evoluzione di questo interessante mercato all'interno del più ampio mercato del vino. Particolarmente interessanti ho trovato alcune indicazioni relative al consumatore tipo del prodotto rosé e soprattutto alcuni dati relativi al fatto della stabilizzazione di questo mercato e quindi di come altri competitors, che naturalmente non sono altrettanto forti come la Francia, abbiano deciso comunque di giocarsi la carta di entrare dentro il mercato statunitense. Quindi un mercato statunitense molto promettente che andremo ancora una volta all'interno di questo ciclo di seminari per il mercato dei vini negli Stati Uniti ad affrontare con quello che sarà, diciamo, il 3° seminario a cui invito tutta l'audience, seminario che si terrà martedì 23 novembre, sempre naturalmente online, alle ore 16 e che abbiamo denominato il mercato del vino negli Stati Uniti, distribuzione, il sistema dei 3 tiers e tutto quello che è importante sapere per esportare. Quindi l'appuntamento al 23 novembre, gli speakers in questo caso saranno i componenti, 2 dei componenti del team del Food and Wine dell'ufficio ICE di New York, nello specifico la collega Mirella Menglide e Paola Pavan, e in quell'occasione sarà presentato un quadro di quello che è il consumatore tipico americano, come avevo anticipato il sistema della distribuzione dei 3 tiers e di come operare per trovare l'importatore. Poi verrà anche affrontato il tema della registrazione con FDA, la registrazione delle etichette e la spedizione. Quindi alla fine chiuderemo con una serie di notizie su cosa fare per operare sul mercato e come costruire una buona relazione con l'importatore affinché si possano raccogliere dei successi sul mercato statunitense del vino, non solamente sul tradizionale settore dei vini rossi, bianchi e degli spumanti, ma portare a casa anche dei risultati interessanti su questo nuovo segmento di mercato che abbiamo affrontato oggi con i vini rosati. Abbiamo verificato che anche grazie alla qualità dei contenuti, delle relazioni dei nostri 2 speaker non ci sono delle domande e quindi ringraziando tutti vi do l'appuntamento per il prossimo seminario. Naturalmente contiamo di spedire a quanti si erano registrati la documentazione di questo seminario, quindi verrà inviata e contiamo sul fatto che se ci fossero delle richieste di chiarimenti, il team di New York è pronto a fornirvele via email. Un grazie a tutti e un arrivederci alla giornata di 23 novembre alle ore 16. Grazie.